94.4 Nairobi, Mombasa 87.9, 102.5 in Kisumu, Nakuru 96.0, 96.7 Eldoret, Nyeri 90.9, Malindi 97.7. Wherever you are in the world, New Zealand, the United States, in the South Pole, the North Pole, Greenland, Iceland, www.spicefm.co.ke and SpiceFM KE on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram as well. And you can join the conversation 0719 012 600. Right, let's now talk about putting food on our table. Politicians are not doing that clearly, so let's just do it for ourselves. We've talked about food security for a while, and every time we talk about people, X number of people who are facing starvation in the country because of one reason or the other, mostly famine because of rain and erratic rainfall patterns. We are talking about people who have produced, and there's a glut in production, but there's no uptick by the market. And these are various other food commodities. And then we talk about maize. And maize has to end up with the story of importation of X number of tons of maize from cheaper countries. Yellow maize, white maize from Mexico. It comes in here, and then there's a price of unga going up, price of unga coming down. We start bringing in the issue of the Ministry of Agriculture, the National Cereals and Produce Board. How much maize are you holding? Then there's the other one, the
Aflatoxin of what is
aflatoxin
actually
issues.
available is
It's
rotting.
contaminated, right? We talk about the Strategic Food Reserve Trust Fund and what it's supposed to do, what it's supposed to be doing in the country. So when you talk about all these things, we now saw the other day that the government, through the Ministry of Agriculture, decided to come up with some reforms, proposed reforms, restructuring of the National Food Reserve and the Food Storage Management. And it was launched by the CS for Agriculture, CS Munya. He said, a number of things we have seen happening in this country. Number one, the government participates in this whole food business through NCPB and the Strategic Food Reserve. We buy maize from farmers, and then at some point we offload this maize by selling it to the market. And then whenever people are hungry, we are looking at the government and asking, so you give us the maize that you're holding. And then the millers are asking, so what is it? Where are we going to get maize? Allow us to import maize cheaply. This whole game is going to come to an end very soon. And he says, by later this year, September, October this year, we're going to have a change of strategy. The government is no longer going to be participating in this trade. What does that mean? What does that mean to our food security? What does that mean to how we're trying to get our things done, by our own experts? Let's speak to one person who was involved in this whole negotiation, or not negotiation, but basically coming up with a new strategy. He is a professor at Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. He is also the chairman of the Joint Technical Committee of National Government and Public Universities on Food and Nutrition Security. Those are the people who are basically looking at, all right, we need to talk about food security. What do we need to do? Government went to academia and went and said, the joint technical universities, public universities, come together. Let's also bring in together experts from government, work together and advise us what we need to do going forward. His name is Professor Wangai Ndirangu, and he joins us now on the line to move us from the point of lack of clarity to some semblance of clarity. Professor, good morning.
Good morning, and how are you today?
We're very well, thank you. Thank you very much
morning.
for speaking to us. Welcome to the Situation Room.
Thank you very much for having me.
Long title that you have here, Chairman, Joint Public Universities and National Government Committee on Food and Nutrition Security. We'll come into that and you'll explain to us what exactly you are doing. Let's start from the basics, all right? In this country, and you'll forgive me when I use perceptions, because you now will give us the reality. In perception that we have is when it comes to food security and talking about the staple food in the country, we think maize. When you talk about whether Kenya has enough food in our storage, we think maize. So maize has primarily dominated the conversation about food security. And when we talk about that, then we have other players who come in. We have the producers. We've got other traders. We've got the National Cereals and Produce Board. We have the Strategic Food Reserve Trust Fund. We have got millers. Then we have the consumer. Just take us through briefly, what exactly do all these players do in this value chain?
Thank you very much. And I think this is very nice to have this discussion because I think it's important for the country. First, because it is in our stated objective by the president that by the year 2022, we want to have a country that is food secure and also nutrition-wise also secure. And so then we need to ask, what does that really mean for us? Now, and so when we think of that and we start thinking about the value chain, what happens then from the point when we produce to the point when we harvest, to the point that we store that food for later use, how we distribute it, and who also distributes, and finally, the utilization. In that respect then, whenever we talk about the food and security, we need to think about 4 important areas. One of them is the availability of food. The second is the stability of that stock throughout the year or the period of use. The third one is the access, because we've had in this country times when people are saying we have a lot of milk in one area and that in another area there is scarcity.
Yeah.
So how do people access it? Do they have the funds, the money to buy it? It may be available but not be for their use. And finally, is the utilization or how the food is used. Because it's also possible that we have a variety of food. For example, there are parts of this country where people would not take fish, for example, or it's not their preferred. It could be available, but it's not being used. There are other areas where coconut, for example, it could be available, but it's not the preference of the people. So how is food then utilized? So that whole ecosystem and how it interacts is important for food and security, and that's really how this whole discussion then is revolving.
Then what's the role of NCPB in this discussion and the Strategic Food Reserves Fund?
Right. We have to step back and look back to the 70s when NCPB was formed. And at that time, government was in a lot of areas. I would say government was doing business, so to speak. And you look in the hotel industry, you look in the banking industry. We had KCB, National Bank, being very big. We had government running enterprises. So when you look at the act that formed NCPB, it gives NCPB the mandate also to trade in food. So over and above the regulation part, the NCPB was also doing the trading part. Now, fast forward, and from 1980s we see, and much more in the 90s, we see the growth of private enterprises. So then you have a scenario where then government is competing in the same space with the private sector it is meant to regulate. Now, that it's like being in a football match, and where you are the player, you are the referee, and and you also set the rules. Then that doesn't work so well. So because of that scenario, we started noticing that from the 1980s onwards, the food situation started fluctuating. And many people will remember 1980, for instance, when we had the first importation of the yellow maize, the very major farming that we had in 1984. And that now has become almost like an annual event. So starting from 1990s, then the government started saying, look, we need to have a strategic reserve that cushions us against a spike. And because then NCPB was the same entity that was storing and also doing commercial trading and also doing the strategic, there was need then to set aside a fund. And so about 5 years ago, the Strategic Food Reserve Trust Fund was formed out of the Public Finance Management Act to be able to set aside a fund that is dedicated to addressing the strategic food needs of the country. And so that's how the two come. Now, at this point, then we're asking ourselves, so after 4 years, what are we learning and what is that we need to do differently?
Has it worked?
Even after that, unfortunately, I would say not. And I would say for a fact, one, when you look at all the maize being produced in the country, SRTF would probably be taking up about 2 to 4 million bags of maize in any given year. Our production is somewhere in the range of about 38 million bags. So in essence, we are saying that the food that is actually going through NCPB and or being handled by SFRTF is probably in the range of between 2 to 10% at the very highest.
So where does the rest?
That's a very important question. Who is then handling the rest? And so these reforms that the minister has initiated is addressed to asking that we cannot spend all our time at thinking about 5% of maize alone, 5% of maize production, and without thinking about who are the players. And we talked about the value chain actors. Number two is that is to come and say that maize is just one of the food items being produced in this country, and which need the support of government to grow. So when then we are all the time, every year in out, thinking about maize and fertilizer for maize, then I think we certainly will be losing the script. And that's what the reform is about, saying how can we widen the scope so that to think that every one county in this country has a potential for a certain food item. Maybe one, maybe two, maybe three. And it needs to be focused so that we enhance that potential.
I have a couple of questions here, if you allow me to interrupt. Number one, at what point did maize then start dominating this whole food security conversation? Like it became the only thing we think about when you talk about food. And secondly, in your own findings, and you're working as a technical committee, who is it that's handling the other 80% of the grain that's produced in the country? If NCPB is only handling actually less than about 5 to 10%, who's handling the other 90%?
Let me start with the first question about how did maize then end up dominating the food security discourse. One is, I think, let's also admit it, that in Kenya, maize is by way the staple food. And not only in Kenya, in fact, we also see that in a country like Zambia and a country like Malawi, there are several countries in the region that where maize is the staple food. But let's also take to account that the pattern is changing. I mean, step back 20 years ago, the consumption of wheat was not as it is today. You can see it off the shelf. Things like pizza, bread, cake, all those kind of things, spaghettis and all that. You see that the wheat consumption now becoming a very also important area, especially in the urban areas. The roots and the tubers, the potato, the chips, and all those kind of things that we are taking also becomes a very, very important. Vegetable, likewise, is becoming a very important food item. So maybe maize then was an important and the premier food item 30 years ago, but we have not updated our situation to see is it still the most important food item. Number two, does it provide us with the nutrition, the calorific needs, the nutrition needs for a Kenyan person, a Kenyan child to grow today? And the answer is absolutely no. So we need to refocus our attention and update it to the current scenario.
It seems like there's an entire process towards getting food secure for any country. Until the point then now when you're dealing with things like surpluses. I mean, this is your territory, so you know it. But just like you're saying that something needs to be done, because we're seeing this push and pull. We're seeing focus on one crop. We're seeing infighting. What would be the first step that needs to take to break away from this now and then say, okay, now here we are, and this is what we actually need to do? Because there just seems to be a whole roundabout. Even narrating what has been happening in the last couple of months is exhausting at best. What needs to happen? What is the first thing that then needs to be happening for then moving forward? Because if we're talking about food security by a certain year, it just looks like a pipe dream at this point.
That's right. And in addressing that question, I want to address the first one that was asked to know, basically what needs to be done. One, the government has initiated, and I think we've completed a process of suitability mapping in each and every county. And I'll give an example. If you look at Makueni County, if you judge Makueni County by the way it produces maize, you are going to miss it.
Yeah.
But when you go to Green Grams, it's very good. It's very good. If you go to Kwale and cashew nut, you find it is very good. If you go to northeastern Kenya, if you judge it by its suitability for livestock production and its contribution to the economy, then you find that it is very suitable. But if you judge the county of Marsabit by the way it produces maize or beans, then you will say it is not suitable. And so we have this narrative that has gone on for a long time of what we call high potential and low potential areas. And that has influenced even the way we allocate resources. So we are saying that every part of this country has a potential. And so the first thing that has happened is to map the suitability. The second thing is then to ask, and that's happening, is then to say, what are the support infrastructure that the government need to provide together with the county government so that these enterprises then thrive. And that is what is going on now. So, and then that addresses the question of first of all, then saying, mapping who are the actors. So the other 90% that is not going to NCPB, in fact 95%. So where is it going? And so when we are at that, then we realize that the private sector in Kenya has grown tremendously. Case in point, on average, the nearest distance of a farmer in the main growing areas to an NCPB store is 25 kilometers. But a study done in 2014 showed that the nearest, the distance to the nearest agro dealer is about 4 kilometers. That was 2014. So I'm sure 6 years later, probably is even much nearer. The question then is to ask, why should then government be competing for business with an agro dealer or trying to provide a parallel infrastructure to the agro dealer who are doing a very nice job? So the thinking right now is that let the private sector, it has proven in many other areas, let us have the private sector play and the government provides the services. So NCPB then is in the process of restructuring so that it provides a hub model. And for those who are familiar with a model like KTDA, KTDA is up there, and for example, it does bulk sourcing of fertilizer, at commercial rate. And then through the factories, it distributes that, and all the way down to the tea buying center. Now, that means that farmer does not need to go too far away from where they live to source these inputs. And also at that point, they also get supported with extension service. The person who is dispensing the farm input, be it a pesticide, be it seeds, be it fertilizer, is also able to provide that farmer with, or producer actually, because not just farmer, it's the whole production, including livestock and fish and fisheries and everything else. They're able to provide that person necessary advice of what works for them. On the river side, whatever then collected, and again I use the KTD model, that once the tea farmer has plucked the tea leaves, they are able to take to the nearest collection center, and the burden of marketing and taking it all the way that the logistics that involves with the market, the output market, is no longer on the farmer but on another. So that's the kind of structure we are trying to develop. So work together with private sector is already very vibrant in Kenya, and in the chance, in the process also, create businesses for people who are innovative.
But an issue as serious as food security, I mean, this is just like it's like national security, right? If we say that we are now just pulling our hands away and saying we just, as government, are going just to be regulating and providing those very fanciful words, a conducive working environment for the private sector to thrive in this sector, we are basically letting hawks come and take charge of food security. What protects the producers and the consumers from these sharks and hawks who would come and maybe even manipulate the entire ecosystem? And basically just we look, the same KTDA model that you're giving on paper, the KTDA model, very well, very good, but look at the kind of issues that we're having right now with the tea sector. The president had to come in himself and try to intervene. The agriculture ministry is trying to intervene to ensure that the KTDA model goes back to what it was supposed to be, or even change it. Because cartel.
That's right. And I think, let me say this first. The government is not doing hands-off. What the government is doing is saying the government is not in direct business. We still have the National Food Reserve that is being entrenched in NCPB. And the purpose of this function is to see that we are continuously studying and monitoring the market. And the government will still intervene on two important things. Let me bring now to the practical realities. In just about 3 months from now, in October, November, you will hear, and this is an annual issue, where the farmers are saying we have too much food, the prices are very low. We need money for the farmer to dispose that to the market at very low prices because they have immediate cash needs. On the other hand, by the July of every year, starting from around April, the millers now start complaining and say the price of maize is too high, let's be allowed to import.
Yeah.
And of course, then at that time also the consumer then starts complaining. So let's think about the food ecosystem. We have three group of people that we want to focus on. The first one is the producer. But the producer must get the right price and the benefit for his work. The second person is a trader who must be able to do a genuine business and make also a profit by helping to distribute food across the country. And the third person is a consumer, that you must be able to predict that the food range is between X and Y. So then what the NFR will be doing and what it needs to do from now going forward is that whenever we have excess production, because we are monitoring this on a daily basis there's a lot of technology that gives us enough data to know, then it's able to offtake through the newly established the where receipt housing system, and therefore keep that food away and therefore avoid the glut in the market. For maize, it will be the same for milk, it will be the same for wheat, it will be the same for any other commodity that has a fluctuating nature.
Professor, if I may ask, these things that you say sound good and they're very encouraging, but how long will it take before they become a reality that the common man in this country can benefit from them?
In fact, in the next 3 months, by October this year, we shall actually be having the first of the warehouse receipts, warehouses licensed or certified warehouse receipt houses. And let me add just one thing that is very important. Going forward, and in fact, even starting from the end of this year, starting with the NCPB, KNTC, and probably also another private sector warehouses, we want to have a situation where actually the farmer is contracted to produce well ahead of the harvest. So he knows very well where am I going to take my produce. Because there is heavy competition, and everybody then not only do support the farmer to produce, but you also agree with them that this produce is actually for me, and this is the price I'm going to offer you for it. And in a commercial environment, we think that is good. So by the end of this year, I think we have the government is very clear that by October, this system must be working, and by December, it should be fully operational. So it's not a long-away dream. It's something that needs to happen very, very quickly before the next harvest season.
What commodities are going to start benefiting from this?
I think obviously the first one. I think there are 6 items that are in the purview right now. One of them is maize. The second one is rice. The third one is meat. Then there is fish. Then there is beans. Did we have all of them? So there is maize. There is rice,
fish.
There is meat, fish,
beans.
dried beans, and powdered milk.
Okay.
Yes.
I know it could be that asking a question that may come out of, but is there a total comprehension by all sectors involved what it really then does mean to be food secure, and are we able to achieve that in the time frame that was initially given, or is it something that continues to be a work in progress?
As you know, the minister announced these changes just about a month ago, and I can tell you between then and now, a lot of work has happened. During the entire of this month, we have been in touch with virtually every other actor, and that is continuing up to the end of June, to get people to understand what we are. And I'll say the very simple thing. You see, every time we talk about food, we talk about problems. And we know the challenges too well. We can talk about it until, as they say, until the dusk.
Yep.
But I think we are saying we have enough capacity, there is will and clear comprehension in government that these need to change. And so we are translating and saying, let's not talk about our challenge. What are the opportunities? And so one of the opportunity is to appreciate that we have a lot of infrastructure. NCPB has a capacity to store 18 million metric tons of food. That's a lot of food, if you think about it. That out of the production, for example, of maize, of 38 million bags, we can store 21 million bags. There is that available in NCPB.
Can I stop you before you go to the next one and just ask a question there as you now continue? Is that there's a capacity to store. Does the country have a capacity to produce that amount as it is now?
Yes, I did mention that already. We actually were producing annually about 38 million bags of maize alone. And we have a capacity of 21 million bags of maize in NCPD. There are, of course, the other people like NTC with a smaller capacity. So, yes, we are producing. And I think you put a very important question before I let you.
Yeah, but in this case, I'm looking at what is being produced year on year. Also, it's being consumed. But if you're looking at what can be stored as a reserve, looking at taking that away then from what is being consumed regularly, is it possible that we do that? Produce so much that it's being consumed by the country. You have surplus that then is reserved in cases of emergency. Can that happen concurrently?
Well, yes. And in fact, I just wanted to say that, you see, one of the other challenges that we have is out of the maize or the food that we are producing, and let me use maize as an example, we are losing between 15 to 20% because of bad storage. Now, and if you think of 40 million bags approximately, and you think about 20%, even think about even 10%, I mean, you're talking about 4 million bags. Now, this is about the same amount of food that we find ourselves importing. So that just by improving storage, we then actually reduce the losses to something below 5%. And why is this part of the problem? It's because many producers don't have good storage to keep their agricultural produce. So by improving and restructuring the storage, we have actually gone a long way in ensuring that the losses and also the benefit to the producer is enhanced. Now, and by the way, that's only in one commodity. I mean, you have had issues about people talking about milk. You had people talking about tomatoes, potatoes, and cabbage, and fish, and everything else. So you can imagine that storage has a potential to resolve a lot of issues. And we are saying, look, the work of the farmer is to produce. They are not experts in, or they are not experts in anything, and we don't want to burden them with storage issues. Let them do their work of producing. Then after that, let other actors then pick up that and add value, and the farmer sits back and they wait for their pay that remunerates. Number two, how then do we intervene? An example is that when you look at wheat, out of every 5 bags of wheat we consume, or 5 kilos of wheat, 4 are imported. And we ask ourselves, why should that continue? So how does then the government intervene by way of incentives? And so you remember, when under this COVID situation, the president announced that he was reducing about 8 billion shillings under the e-voucher system to support farmers, so that and production and just to revamp or to cushion farmers during this period, because then there are cases where, for example, the inputs are too high, and you still need to cushion the farmer to support them to to lower the cost of production. But what we are doing differently is that in the past we would have an agent, importing fertilizer and distributing it.
Yeah.
And that gives room for the cartel to grow. So rather what we're doing is that you say, look, farmer can make good decisions. You provide a voucher, you provide a support package, and send it through a digital means. It's an ECE incentive. So it's a registered farmer, and you target them directly. Then they go on their own accord to an agro dealer of their choice, and they redeem that voucher. Therefore, you eliminate all this middle group that has been doing a lot of disservice to the country. So there is a lot of... So you can see that the whole reform is not really about institutions. It's about the whole ecosystem that is needed from right for production to stabilizing trade and to ensure that the consumers are protected from price hikes and that the food given to them is of sufficient quality and quantity for nutrition.
I have two questions to ask, Professor. One, the warehouse receipts are actually akin to a title deed that the farmer is given for the crop deposit in the warehouse.
Correct.
Now, is this something that banks can use in the same way they use a title deed to make the farmer perhaps, or cushion the farmer against, or just help the farmer in his production or in his farming processes? That's number one. Number two, alongside this question, we used to have an organization called the Kenya Farmers Association. It morphed into KGGCU, and then I think it died. The functions that you mentioned about managing inputs and so forth for farmers, these organizations, did they not in one way or the other actually try to perform this particular task that you are talking about?
Correct. Let me start with the first one, and I'm glad that you bring that discussion about the place of the warehousing receipt system. Now, and true enough that we talked about the storage. Now, we're asking ourselves, how do we guarantee the producer that the produce they put into the warehouse retains the same quality? You have had cases of people saying that government is of so much has gotten damaged. Now, so the first thing that is happening is that we are registering all the warehouses, whether private or government, that are doing the storage business and put them to the required standard. Number two, then that once a person deposits their produce there, they get a receipt, which is a tradable security. It's a tradable item. That means that you can use that. And already there is a conversation that with a bank like KCB, we hope in time we'll also bring others bank on board, where then they can accept that receipt and advance the farmer some money against it, because they are sure that the product or the deposit is in good order and will remain in that manner until the time when it is needed. So that has two things. First of all, it resolves the farmer's immediate need for cash, so that if I produce and is a glut, I am able to keep my produce for next 6 months until the price is right for me to dispose. But at the same time, I'm able to offset the immediate cash needs. The second thing is that these ware receipt houses will be tradable under the commodity exchange, which is currently being established under the Ministry of Trade. And what then this means is that if I want to trade my agricultural produce, I need not go to a physical market, because all I need to do is just like a stock exchange, and I will put it up there and say, look, I have maize in Boy, 800 bags. If you want it, this is my offer price. Someone else says I have another 200 in Kitale, and you take it from where it is. So it's a process of price discovery, and so you know. And in fact, going forward, because this is important, and why it's that the government will not directly buy, but if the National Food Reserve needs to take out excess, it will go to that open market and it will buy receipts, but not physical product. So it will buy receipts. So you can see that the ware receipt housing is another avenue by which government is making sure that the trade in food is more open, is more friendly. It has less burden in terms of logistics.
Prof, any country that has successfully rolled this out?
Yes, I think the concept of food reserve has been, it's really widespread across the country. I mean, just our neighbors here in Tanzania, I mean, they have been doing that, implemented both the food reserve system and also an incentive system. It's working pretty well, and I think, and we all can see their food situation. Of course, their situation is unique, different from Kenya because of the staple foods and all that. Ethiopia has recently, I think in the last 15 years, has been also implementing a similar system. Zambia, I think with the support from FAO, they've done quite a bit of work there. And even move across actually outside Africa. Japan, for example, has a food reserve system based on rice as a staple food. You go to the US, they have basically US in China. So the concept is really not new at all. It's been applied in many countries in the world. It has worked, and I think all probably that need is just to look at these models and customize for a unique environment, and it should work.
One of the areas that I want to still keep going back is the peculiarity of Kenyans, especially the Kenyans in that segment called trade. Now,
Go ahead.
that segment of trader.
Yes.
There is the peculiarity of them. The one is the likelihood of those traders coming in to first of all try and manipulate the system. For example, when we say that we're opening up storage so that now private sector can come and play in this, how can we guarantee that the private sector, a few players in the private sector, will not come and sort of try and use their political influence to bulldoze and occupy the majority of the space in our national storage system, the NCPB, and thereby just locking out everybody else, and we end up having cartels and such, the underhand deals that we have seen in business.
Right. I think government is very conscious of that fact, and one of the things is that NCPB will still continue a major role in food storage. Out of the 21 million bags space, the government is releasing 7 million bags under lease to private sector, and also on terms of performance. So they are, you're not just giving the space for whatever you kind of use, but it's on a performance system lease. Number two is that besides the NCPB, remember KNTC also holds substantial, I think about 173,000.
This is the Kenya National Trading Corporation.
They have space. The KFA, they have space. And you may not be aware, but there are also a number of private, not too many, but it's growing, but there are a number of them that are coming up. The second, that are already trading.
Is the process, sorry to pause you there, Professor, is the process of leasing out this space meant to be open, transparent, and involving all the players?
It will be it's an open process. It will be an open solicitation for whoever, and because LCB will look at the best offer, because this is still an asset that belongs to government, and so LCB will be asking what's the best return you can give us in terms of, okay, we know you may need to do some investment to refurbish the store, and you need to recoup that back. But then we still will be looking at the best possible rent or lease offer that they can get. So it's a completely open process. And I think somewhere around in the next, around September or thereabout, that should be coming out for anyone interested to bid. So there is that conscious need that private sector need also to be regulated and need to be held on account of performance.
So in that whole issue of regulating, I want to give you another example of another sector, the petroleum marketing companies. At some point, petroleum marketing companies were thought to have come together and cartelled properly to a point where they were thought to be manipulating the market in terms of the price of a product at the pump, the artificial shortages that are being created in the market, which will continue driving up the price. And this is what led to the government coming up with a formula that now regulates how much profit the petroleum marketing companies are allowed to rake out every month. Same kind of a problem that we have seen with others, where we see cartels forming and sort of trying to manipulate the market system. How do we guarantee our food security and ensure that cartels never form and never have a place in this? Sugar sector, same business.
Yes. No, and I think you're absolutely right that the nature of private sector is that it's profit motivated. It's you protect your territory and your market, and so sometimes which works to the disadvantage by locking out potential competition.
Yep.
But I want to look at perhaps a more successful sector, and this is the banking sector. And if you remember, a couple of years back, we had banks where government had a major stake, therefore suffering bad loans and all that. And I think the moment that sector was liberalized, I mean, you know how hard it was to get forex then, and so on and so forth. But the moment this was opened up, with the Central Bank of Kenya playing a regulatory, a very silent one, not directly into the market, we have seen a more successful. So you're not really, the government is not getting in to play. I would say it's just playing like a referee. You are really giving instructions from this, or rather a coach from the line without really getting in. You are the interacting with the players as a referee, but you are not actually kicking the ball. So, and I think when you look at the CBK, for example, look at the interest rate. There is the interest rate committee that every month comes and tell us this is the benchmark. What is it? Interest rate, which then the banks then can use to make their own judgment commercially in a very competitive environment. We've seen in that sector also that we have also enabled the microfinance to provide alternative source of finance. So even in these warehouses, by the way, we have two categories of warehouses. Is what is trading at the warehouse housing level, and is what we call the primary, that you may choose and say, as a cooperative, we want to have our own storage, and it is licensed, it's regulated, and that is it. So I think the secret is to allow as many players as possible to be in the field at their level. So it's not a preserve of a few. And that is the intention between now and the next 6 months to December. Yes.
Just to come back to what basically you're saying is that this year, by the end of this year, we'll see far-reaching reforms in the management of our food security. So basically, next year, we do not expect to hear the Minister for Agriculture saying that I'm opening up the market for importation of maize.
One, I think there's very clear, directive from the President, from the Cabinet Secretary, that this process has to be in place in 6 months. That's very clear. The second thing is government want to actually, as much as possible, get out of the idea of telling anybody, go and buy maize at this price, go sell maize at this price, go and import maize at this price. And because that is not the duty of government, but it's only, and by the way, one of the important way, and the government will be coming in, is through something called a food balance sheet committee. And the holding of this committee is purely a statistical committee, or, is a knowledge entity that monitors who imports, what food has come in, what food has gone out of the country, what has been produced, what has been consumed on a daily basis. So that at the end of every month, like your money, it's a balance sheet. It's a food balance sheet. That's what they got. So if there is going to be any shortage, because that could happen, again, let's also be honest with ourselves, that it's not something that's going to come back, overnight. It is starting with a very deliberate, vision. But then, of course, before it gets to the level, it may take 2-3 years. But the point is that by the next 6 months, we should have substantial part of this work progressed.
Professor Wangai, I mean, it sounds, as we're listening to it now, it sounds like, it's great. But the actual players in this are the farmers. Are they aware of this?
That they're not going to sell their
they're not going
maize
to
to NCPD.
to NCPD anymore. Are they aware that this is happening? Is it being communicated to them? Because I'd think it'd come as a shock to them if then, or they would have said something totally different from what we are hearing they're saying now.
In fact, we have a very aggressive communication. We are actually reaching out to all the farmers, even using their vernacular stations, saying the same message that this is for your benefit. One, it gives you an opportunity to discuss with the off-takers or the purchasers even before you harvest, instead of going to line up after you have harvested, so that you even have a date when you should deliver to whoever you are selling to. Number two, we are giving you choices that you're not just producing for government, you are producing for the market. And therefore, there are all these market players who are competing, and the government on the other side is ensuring that you are cushioned against undue imports. You are cushioned against very high cost through a process of incentive, and we also know you, because like any other business, you need to know your customers.
Yep.
So NCPB is in the process of saying, who are my customers? What are they producing? Where and how can I support them? And when do I need to be ready to receive their product? So we are going out to all the regions. In fact, I think the other day, I think we were talking to the people in the North Rift. I think this week we are talking to the people, I think, in the Western Kenya. We are going out to the people in Central Kenya, to Ramogi, so that we reach them in the language that they really understand as best.
Prof, I'm going to just point it out here that we have seen in various sectors of government, when government is rolling out a project, they are very good in putting it out on paper. They are very good at developing policy, at going to parliament, convincing parliament to come up with the laws and regulations and making far-reaching promises, but they forget the main player here, who's the citizen. If I give you the example of the Central Bank of Kenya last year rolled out a major project, which was to retire old notes and bring into the country new notes. And within a short period of time, this was implemented. But everybody across the country knew what was required of them. Everybody knew what was happening. Now, we are talking about something that is far-reaching because the vast majority of this country is agricultural. So everybody is a producer somewhere in the country. Now, very many producers, I can tell you for sure, yes, you're rolling out these projects, you're talking to them, but very many producers don't really know what's going to happen in the next 2 years, or even starting October this year. And this is where it's very, very important that I think you also just critically review the communication. Because that mentality that government has, and I know you're not in government, you're in academia, the government has this mentality of, okay, these are teething problems. We're going to roll it out. Yeah, eventually farmers are going to learn that we are no longer buying their maize, that they have to find somewhere else to sell their maize. Eventually they'll learn this receipt warehousing system. I mean, they'll see it in practice. They'll learn from their neighbors. They'll hear from whenever we go to a radio station here and there once in a while. This cannot be the case. In this particular one, it's food, it's livelihoods of people. People don't just farm to eat, they also farm to eke out a living. This is what is going to take children to school next year. This is what's going to sustain them next year. If they don't know, my friend,
there's a problem.
Backlash.
That's right. Let me first of all clarify one so that it's very clear. The point is not that government is not, or NCPB is not going to buy maize. NCPB still has 15 million of bag space with them. But the point that they are doing it on a commercial basis. Take it. It's like KCB and Barclays Bank.
Yep.
They are out there. KCB is government owned, but it is interacting with you as on a business term.
Yep.
So what you're saying is that we're not going to have the minister announcing and telling NCPB, go and buy 4 million bags.
At this price.
The NCPB has to do a commercial decision. And I can tell you right now, by the way, if you just want to know that this is working. In the last 1 year, we have not seen any import, and until the government resisted the attempt to import maize, you've seen that the price of maize given to the farmers has consistently remained at about 3,300 shillings, perhaps one of the best ever in the market. Number two, right now, NCPP, they have not imported any the so-called subsidized fertilizer, which was retailing at almost about 20-something, 2,800 shillings.
Yeah.
Can I tell you right now, the price of fertilizer is at about 1,800 shillings. And why so? Because the producer of fertilizers have been able to approach NCPB and tell them, look, can you help us distribute this price, this fertilizer, and this is our offer price. In fact, it has been going consistently down, because then we have removed this distortion, and we need to understand where we are coming from. Look, the government would in many times buy maize, a bag, say for example, at 2,800. Then during the time of excess, come at the time of scarcity, the maize is offloaded to millers at 1,800. Now, what does that do? If the miller then can get maize in bulk from NCPB at 1,800, they have then no need at all to aggregate, to go to the farmer and mop up what is in their stores.
Yeah.
So in that sense, the government intervention would then distort the market. So is this distortion in the market that we are trying to
eliminate,
correct by saying government has no business doing business?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Wangai Ndirangu, for speaking to us. And we will wait to see how the rollout of this grand project is going to look like. But we'll still have to call you in for more conversations on this. I'm sure there are very many questions that will be emerging as we progress and we get closer to October.
Thank you very much, and look forward to having this more conversation. As you say, I think it's important for us to get this message across and assure all our producers that this is for their benefit and generally for the good of the country and the consumers.